Hey guys, I hope you liked the playthrough in the beginning. And as the thumbnail says, the guitar tones for that one was made using free plugins only. And even though the mix itself has some mastering plugins on it, you'll hear later on when I walk you through the master chain that I'm using, and turning it on and off, that it doesn't make a night and day difference to the tones. So here's how I have the project set up for this demo. So starting off from the top here, you have a drum mix, and that's the stereo mix down from a Frankenstein kit. And the kits I've used are the Bogren Digital Krimh drums and GGD Matt Halpern P4 kit, choosing various parts of each kit to create a Frankenstein kit. And next up is the bass, and it's a mix down from Submission Audio Eurobass 3, which is by far the best sounding bass VST out there in my opinion. And here is how they sound together without any mastering plugins. Yeah, going extra hard on the blast bass there. I really like how the kit sounds and how Jens has set up the snares in his drum library. They sound really ringy and natural and blended together with some kick-ass one-shot samples. It really makes the drums punch through a dense mix. And the bass just sounds brutal. And down here we have some drum effects. It's a snare swell in and a big snare. Sounds like this. Give it some extra character. And then we have the two left and right rhythm guitars. It sounds like this in DI. So nothing fancy there, just a basic DI. And I have some guitar swells as well that are mixed down. Sounds like this. Also for some extra character in the mix. And just to show you the automation I have here, is that I've automated the main volume for the rhythm guitars in certain parts just to make it a bit more interesting. And lastly, we have two ambient guitars that sounds like this. So that's the overview of the project. Let's head into the rhythm guitars and see how I got the tones for those. So what I tend to do, especially when I have a low tune guitar such as this one, is that I want an EQ before the amp or amp sim and to shape the DI to get the tones that I want and maybe clear up some muddiness or whatever, push the signal a bit further into the amp using an EQ. So for that one I usually do Pro Q3 or BX SSL console emulation. But since we're doing freeware here, I found one from a plugin company called Analog Obsession that has this 5-band equalizer, a Neve style EQ, and it really sounds very similar to the BX Console 4000 SSL emulation that I normally use from Plugin Alliance. It sounded really clean and gave me exactly the thing that I was after. So what I've done here is that I boosted some low end around 130 Hertz. Let me see, yeah, 132, about 8 decibels so, with a shelf. And I've cut some low mids around 5 decibels at 300 Hertz with a Q value of 1. And then I boosted some high mids around 7 decibels and a Q value of 1 there as well. And the frequency is about 1200 Hertz. So this is how it sounds with and without on just the DI. Yeah, so as you hear, it shapes the DI, give it a bit more bite into the amp. Cranked a bit of low end as well, which gives it a bit nice thump and reduces some muddiness in the lower mids. So I really like how that sounded. Next up is actually a paid plugin, but I only use that for the pitch shifting function in the Neural DSP Gojira. So everything else up here that controls the sound is bypassed, so I've checked it. It doesn't do anything to the sound. I only used it for automation on the pitch shift parts of the song. And for the amp, I chose the Goblin from Aurora DSP. And this is a really kick-ass pedals, amp, sim, whatever you might call it. And I can't believe it, it's free, because it sounds just as good as any of the paid similar plugins out there. It sounds really good. It's a bit limited, but it does the job, and it's free, so hey, not gonna complain there. So these are the settings that I landed on. Added some highs, added some lows, so a bit of air, and the mid is at 0. And I cranked the gain knob, what are you gonna call it? This knob in the middle here, all the way up, because I thought that sounded the best. Disengaged the IR here, and I turned the slider over to nasty. I couldn't tell that it did as much of a difference. Could be that that's the 2 IRs that you have available to choose from, but don't take my word for it. I just turned the IR off since I'm using a free IR pack, which I'll go into later. But by just playing through the Goblin with the IR on, it sounded really good, so I could have used that, but I'm gonna use a special free IR pack here that I'm gonna go through later, as I said. But let's just turn that on, since otherwise it will sound really nasty, but not in a good way. And then just play through it and see what all these knobs do to the sound. Yeah, so as you hear, it sounds pretty awesome. And I really like how the EQ is really smooth here in the highs and super massive in the lows without being over muddy. So the EQ is really good in this one. Yep, so pretty kick-ass for being a free amp. I really like that. And as the IR loader, I'm using the free Fenner IR, also from Aurora DSP. It's pretty basic and really simple to use. Just load the IRs up here and you can flick between them if you have multiple IRs in one pack. And what I'm using for IRs in this demo is YouTuber Ressington's latest free IR pack, the Big Boot Impulse Response pack, which sounds really good. And I'm gonna play through them all in the later part of the video, where I'll describe what cab and what mics he's been using for the capturing of these IRs. It sounds really good. And before I forget to mention, I'm gonna put a link to all of these plugins in the description. So that will include this IR pack as well, of course. And lastly, let's check out what I've got going on the rhythm guitar bus. First off is the saturation knob from Softtube, where I've eased some saturation in, about 0.6, and put it to keep high on the saturation type. It sounds like this, with and without. Just brought the guitars a bit forward, made it a bit more exciting, cuts through the mix a bit better. And lastly, in the chain on the rhythm guitar bus is the Pro EQ, the included EQ in Studio One. And here I've just boosted some top end and cut the very highest fizz. So let's check out what Pro EQ does to the sound. Yeah, just the final touch that I felt the guitars needed to cut through extra and give it a bit more final bite to the tone. Sounds really good. So that's it with the rhythm guitars. Let's pan them left and right so you can hear them in stereo. in solo, so you can really hear how the tones sound without any mastering, just using freeware. And as I said, the archetype plugin here doesn't do anything to the sound. You can turn it off just to make sure. So here's how it sounds. Yeah, pretty brutal sound there just by using freeware. So this is a really interesting experiment. Well, I'm gonna quickly go over my mastering chain here and then play the mix with and without all these plugins so you can hear that it doesn't do that much of a night and day difference. First off, I have the mix tool built in from Studio One, where I take off 12 decibels of gain just for some gain staging. Next up, I have the BX Console SSL 4000E, which I mentioned in the beginning from Brainworks and Plugin Alliance. And this one boosts some highs and lows and also uses some console emulation, but that's it for this one. And next up is the BX Townhouse bus compressor with these settings. And it takes off about 3 or 4 decibels of gain reduction. I think it sounds really good. And next up is like a secret sauce plugin, you can call it. And it sounds really good just by loading it up, actually. It does something to the sound. It increases the volume a bit, which can fool you to believe that it does something good to the sound, but I think it does a bit more than just that. And by setting this around 2 at 100 Hertz, I think it gives the mix a bit extra weight to it. Sounds really good. All the other buttons are just by default. Next up, we have the Fab Filter Pro Q3, which I also mentioned in the beginning, that I normally use on separate tracks. This one is set to just controlling the sides, and I've reduced the dB around 2 just to clear up the sides and make some room for cymbals and other stuff that lives on the sides. And of course the rhythm guitars get a bit affected here, but it's only 2 decibels, so it doesn't do that much. Just controls it and cleans it up a bit. And next up I have the Flatline by Submission Audio. And this one is a real game changer for me. Mixes that I've been using after this one came out sounds immediately a lot better. It's a master grade clipper and just sounds awesome on everything, basically. So for this mix, I've got this threshold at minus 9.36, the shape at 95%, and the output at 0. And during the mix down, I have the oversampling at 32 times, but that increases the CPU so much that I can't run a stream with OBS with that on, so I have to put that to off. But for mix downs, I have it set to 32 times. And lastly, in the chain, I have the Ozone 6 Maximizer by Isotope, and that one has the threshold for this mix at around minus 2.5. And all the other settings you can see here. The ceiling minus 0.3 just to control the output so it doesn't overload. And it takes off a bit the finest peaks at the end. It doesn't do that much to the main sound, but just controls it so it doesn't overbear the mix, basically. So that's it. Let's just engage all these plugins besides the last one here. And you can hear what that does to the sound if I just turn them on and off. Yeah, so there you go. Of course, it does something to the sound, and it just brings the mix together and made it more brutal, basically. So, of course, mastering chain does something to the guitar sound as well. But as you heard, when I flicked the mastering on and off to the guitars themselves, it brought up more volume and made it a bit thicker, but not change the character of the guitars, in my opinion anyway. So I think even though having just a non-mastering chain, the guitar sounds really good anyway. Alright, lastly, I'm just gonna go through all the IRs from the IR pack, and you can hear how the different IRs sounds. So I'm gonna solo one of the guitars here and then just flick through the IRs that are included in his pack, and you can hear it for yourself. Yeah, so there you go. I hope you liked the demo. It's awesome to see what you can do with just free plugins nowadays. Just goes to show how far the technology has come in the last 5-10 years. So it's amazing times we live in. If you want to support me, as always, please subscribe to my channel. Hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever I release a new video. Put a thumbs up to this one, really matters to me. And until the next one, see you later.